fascinated with all the legends of the giants, of this ancient race that they keep finding hundreds, if not thousands, of reports of going back into prehistory all around the world, but most notably in North America. Even in my hometown near Cambridge, a village called Cherry Hinton, there's actually been some giants discovered up on the hills there. This seems to be quite a popular subject at the moment. I'm not sure why. I'm not even sure why I'm kind of fascinated by this. If you all start leaving, I'll know you don't find it that interesting. But it's one of these subjects which is kind of like a suppressed part of our history. Because in North America, just to give you an example, there's been over 1,000 reports from old newspapers, journals, Smithsonian records, and so forth, of skeletons between 7 foot and about 15 feet high, some with double rows of teeth, all over North America, mainly in the mound culture sites, but also from California to New England. I started looking into this with two researchers, Ross Hamilton and Jim Vieira, who are both based in America. And I've been looking at the British, European, and other worldly reports around the world. So this is some of the stuff we're going to run through in the next hour, I think I've got. And you can see that there's quite a lot to cover. So let's start back in my home village when I lived for many years in Cherry Hinton. Because even up on the hills in Cherry Hinton in the early 1800s, some very large skeletons were discovered at a place called the War Ditches. Strangely, at the base of the hill, there's a site called Giant's Grave, and there's a megalith there with a footprint in it, which we're going to have a look at later, at these giant footprints. But also, there's legends of giants up on the hills there, and this is right on literally on the hill that my school was on. So I was quite intrigued that even in your local vicinity, you actually find records, if you know where to look, of these strange giant skeletons. And even the pub that's right at the base of the hill is called the Robin Hood and Little John pub. Little John was known as a giant himself. Throughout the world, there's different cultures going back into different parts of history and prehistory that depict giants, not only in the rock carving that you can see here, but in their legends and their stories, and in the folklore. And sometimes the way they're described, it seems very matter of fact. It's not just stories. For example, there's a whole story in Glastonbury, where I currently live in England, at the Abbey there, back in the 1100s. The monks were digging up this area which legend stated King Arthur was buried in. And they dug down to a certain level and they came up with a strange cross which states that King Arthur is buried here, which is, no one really knows if King Arthur existed. When they dug down several feet further, I think another 12 feet or 16 feet or something, 8 feet, they actually found this great coffin, and they found this extremely large skeleton. And it was described, and it was also double-checked by several people, it was described as absolutely gigantic. It appeared to be much taller than an average man, and the space between the eye sockets was as wide as the palm of a man's hand. Apparently this famous king was truly larger than life. So this is just, again, in where I currently live now, in Glastonbury. No one there really knows about this. There's another King Arthur connection here, this time in the Wye Valley. And around 1700, the skeleton of a giant stature was discovered, again, with a name relating to King Arthur. There's lots of places that don't relate to King Arthur in England, obviously, one or two. But I'm just going to run through some examples of some reports that myself and Jim uncovered over the last year. You find them in local history books, records of villages and towns, and often in foreign newspapers. Often you don't find the original reports in the English newspaper records anymore. So you have to look abroad and you find references to the English discoveries. This is just one, a very large-sized man, and the teeth were perfect. This is something we'll come on to shortly, because even in North America and in different parts of the world, somehow they had amazing teeth. Whether they were brilliant dentists, or whether their diet was good, or whether, what I believe, it was a genetic trait. There's something strange about this that keeps reoccurring all around the world. Even at Stonehenge, there's legends of giants that go very far back. Originally, it was called the Giant's Dance. That was the original name of Stonehenge. Stonehenge is a much more modern name. There was a massive skull that was on display in a local church for over 100 years that has now disappeared. That's been witnessed. There's a 7-foot skeleton discovered in one of the in the area around Stonehenge. And even down here, a 9-foot 4-inch skeleton was found in Salisbury, which is the area around Stonehenge. Obviously, this is an artist's impression of what they may have looked like. And also the ancient stories of Merlin. This is actually the oldest known picture or painting of Stonehenge that ever existed. And it shows a giant building it. Merlin's down there on the bottom left with the nice beard. And he was said to have summoned giants from Ireland to bring the stones over and to construct Stonehenge itself. And so this was part of the history of the kings of Britain. That goes back to about during the 1100s. And because Merlin was said to have employed giants from Ireland, I started to look into giant reports in Ireland, and lo and behold, there are several accounts. This one's in Sligo. This is a very, very interesting megalithic area. I visited there last year. And you can see here the skull, jawbone, again with teeth in very good condition. Various other parts of the human anatomy, must have been of giant stature. So we know that even though they're not given exact descriptions, they're certainly suggesting giants even in that part of Ireland. If we go to the Boyne Valley of Fornox, for instance, this is one of the major megalithic sites, they call them tombs, with some brilliant rock carvings, all connected with Newgrange and Knowth and other sites in the area. And there used to be several mounds around that particular area. And this is where they found two of the skeletons were larger in height and width than the largest present-day man. Excavations on the surface of the mound revealed several shallow graves containing the skeletons of both babies and adults. Now, this is the first report that came out about this, but another report came out with more detail, and it shows that most are around 7 feet in height, of extraordinary width of shoulder and massive bone construction. These are the type of traits you would find in Cro-Magnon man. And even, strangely, in Neanderthal man as well. But there's suggestions that the exact same descriptions we find in North America, which we'll come on to shortly. This is the famous 12-foot giant that was on display around Ireland and throughout England as well in the 1800s. It was petrified in a bog in the area, this area in Ireland, County Antrim. It was 12 foot 2 inches high, and they literally had to cover up its private parts because women would faint at what they saw. But what happened to it later, it kind of disappeared when it was on a train back to Ireland from London, and this is the only photo that remains of it. People think it's a hoax, but this is unknown at the moment. If it is, it's certainly a very good one for the time it was created in. There's some other examples in Ireland. This is Louth, and it shows you that this person must have been 10 feet high, which is pretty tall, double the height of some of us here. And we come back to England. There's just a few examples here. The 9-foot skeleton found in Surrey, a 7-foot skeleton found in Leicestershire. And even at a stone circle site up in Scotland, a mound of uncommon size was unearthed. Again, in Scotland, we have references here to some bones that are quite fresh and of extraordinary size. Everyone was wonderstruck at the immensity of the bones. He took the lower jawbone and easily put his head through it. It is added that it was a beautiful day, but all of a sudden there came on thunder and lightning, wind and deluging rain, the like of which no man had ever heard or saw. Now, this is very interesting. This is a very strange tradition that keeps happening when ancient sites, especially those of giant legend, are dug up. There's actually a book by Anthony Roberts called Sowers of Thunder, which is based upon this idea, that when you disturb a giant's grave, you will hear he somehow had magical control of the weather and would create thunder and lightning to stop it being excavated. This has happened at megalithic sites that have no references, no legends of giants as well. So I find this particularly interesting, and we'll come on to more of that later, especially the connections with that in South America. Again, we discovered a skeleton of large proportions with both legs gathered up. This is in Dorsetshire at a tumulus in a mound. And this is from a 7-foot 6-inch skeleton from Wakefield from 1846, 7 feet 6 inches tall. And Westmoreland, England, a 7-foot skeleton was uncovered. And even in the mid-1880s, very interesting comments were made about this. because it was found with a megalithic, within a megalithic site, actually buried within the ground. 7-foot skeletons are a global phenomenon. People were larger in the past, as were the animals larger in the past. It was also said that the funerary urns that were found were well fired, meaning that there was examples of technology, ingenuity and knowledge. This covers all of greater ancestry and paints a different historical picture than what is currently politicized. Now, this is still true today. This was over 100 years ago. This comment was made by this professor. So I find it very interesting that still today there's an unknown, a sort of hidden history of who these people really were, that we are probably ancestors of. A 7-foot skeleton found in Portsmouth, England, between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. And the discovery of these remains has an interesting bearing upon the legend still persisting of giants who lived in the locality. So even where there's legends of giants, there may be some massive skeletons buried very nearby. This is the 9'6" skeleton found in Durham. The teeth, he said, he took out of a gigantic skeleton of a man. In the middle of the bank was found the skeleton of a human body, which measured 9 feet 6 inches in length, the shin bone measuring 2 feet 3 inches from the knee to the ankle, and around it were 4 large flat stones. This is the same as we find in North America in the mounds. So it seems to be a cross-cultural connection here with these ancient races between Britain and America. Even down in Cornwall, we find very large bones being discovered. And there's legends associated with it on the right there. The stone is 9 feet high, and the legend is that the king was as tall as that. He is said to be buried under the stone, complete with his treasures and weapons. So we find it all over the place. In Wales, this is just a local history of Wales. He found that the remains of a tumuli that the person interred was above the common size of men. We go on and on. I've only got about 800 more of these to get through. And in North Wales, in the Great Orme mines in North Wales, which date to around 3,500 years ago, more than 2,500 hammers were discovered, which were of immense size, 3 times the size pretty much, and they realised that a person had to be 12 to 18 foot tall to be able to wield them and use them. So archaeologists will argue that they're ceremonial hammers, but why on earth would you need 2,500 of them? Again, we find giant hand axes discovered in Kent, which are exceptional size and quality, again showing the technological prowess of the ancient giants of England. And this just shows you the pictures of it and where it came from. At Sheringham in Norfolk, we find a similar description here, where more hand axes were discovered. This is the original newspaper report. No adequate explanation of the purpose which the gigantic size of a Sheringham axe could serve has been offered. Well, I offer it was a massive, tall giant. Again, this is in Bedfordshire, not far from where I was brought up in Cambridgeshire. It just shows you some perfectly preserved skeletons. The male is believed to have been a chieftain, and he must have been a man of magnificent physique, as the skeleton measures 6 feet 6 inches, while the head is massive. The woman was laid at right angles to the man, with her feet resting against the side of his body. Again, this is a tradition we find in North America. These are the very interesting reports here from the Keswick area and the famous Keswick skull. The giant skull, from the measurements of the giant skull at the Museum of Keswick, Cumberland County, the stature of the giant must have been in excess of 10 feet, or about the height of the Philistine Goliath. Another example in the same area that was discovered in the 1660s, a very extraordinary and prodigious sized giant was discovered. The length of the thigh bone was nearly 6 feet, and the skull, teeth and other parts proportionately monstrous, so that the length of the whole body was computed at 21 feet tall. So we're getting pretty big now. Imagine, probably almost the ceiling, I would imagine, up there. And there are references which a lot of archaeologists claim is that many of the giants that are discovered in Britain and Europe are actually Saxon giants, because they were quite a large statured race. But some of these are obviously much, much older, whereas this one is an actual Saxon discovery. And even on the continent, we find, even in tumuli, that the bones of enormous size, double the ordinary in fact, were found in a tumulus. So we find this even going onto the continent now. And Italy as well, there's several reports here of a race of giants. Archaeologists found the skeletons of a woman 7 feet tall in an 11th century grave, which is quite interesting, so it's fairly modern. And Turin, 7 of the skeletons indicated that the men were 7 feet tall of an African race, in going back hundreds if not thousands of years. And Sicily, this is a very strange story. I'll just read you the important parts here, where they kind of fell through this chasm and actually found this temple with hieroglyphs and preserved giant skeletons. And even in the general area, more were discovered. He was informed that some human skeletons of vast size had been dug from the ground about 3 miles distant from where they made this discovery. Captain Allen placed the bones of the most perfect skeleton in their proper position and found that the skeleton to be 11 feet and 4 inches in length, Italian measure, which is equal to about 10.5 feet English. This just shows you the woodcut that was that accompanied the report. And in France, it's just several reports here. I've just highlighted some of the important aspects of the reports here. These are all genuine newspaper reports, and you can find these yourself online if you know where to look. 14 men on the bottom left here, 14 men of gigantic size were revealed. In each case, the heads were of great size with huge jawbones, which is unusual to find these. We keep finding these anomalies. In the middle at the top, skeletons of giant warriors uncovered in France. At the bottom there, belonging to a race of men between 10 and 15 feet in height. And then on the right, 8 7-foot skeletons were brought to light beneath a huge monolith weighing more than 4 tons, not too far from Paris. So we're finding references all over France, again connected with the megalithic sites. Even in Greenland, we find examples. These strange people, said Captain Jensen, represented the Eskimos' tradition, almost legendary tribe of giants. They were 7, 8, and even 9 feet tall. On Tenerife, we find other reports here. On Tenerife, you find these very interesting stone-built pyramids, these black basalt pyramids on certain parts of the island that were investigated by Thor Heyerdahl some time ago. What they discovered were of tall stature with proportionate limbs. There were giants among them of incredible size, and that it may not appear fabulous, I will not repeat what is said on the subject. Of one, it is generally said as a verified and ascertained fact that he was 14 foot high and had 80 teeth in his mouth. We'll see more examples of this. He's probably referring to double rows of teeth, which is a trait we do find, especially in North America, but in other parts of the world. And even near Ankara in Turkey, in the Hittite region, there's a report that goes back to 1933. The coffin and skeleton of a Hittite princess of the mysterious race that ruled Anatolia 5,000 years ago. The skeleton of a guard who was 7 feet 1 inches tall are the sensational finds that Turkish archaeologists digging at this town south of Ankara. Now, this is just a couple of hours away from this incredible polygonal wall site of Alacahoyek and also Hattusa, which are well worth a visit. And whilst we're in Turkey, there's even suggestions that very large bones and skeletons were found in southeast Turkey. I put a picture of Göbekli Tepe on the left just to tantalize you. There is no direct connection between these bones that were discovered and Göbekli Tepe, but there is in this picture. In the 50s, when they were digging roads in the Euphrates Valley, this is a reconstruction of some of the bones that were recorded and measured. And they guessed and estimated them to be 14 to 16 feet tall, which is pretty tall when you think about it. And there are many in that whole area. This is the kind of the ancient biblical area. There are many reports actually in the Bible of giants. Here's just some examples here. I'm not going to read all of these out to you, but I'll just leave that up there. But just an example, there were giants in the earth in those days, the classic analysis there. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, and different other reports. I'll leave that up just for a moment, just to give you some examples of that, because this is something that has sort of baffled scholars for many years. Biblical scholars, Christian O'Brien analysed this, and a brilliant researcher called Patrick Cook. He's passed away now, but I highly recommend you look at his work, because he was a biblical scholar, and he was very interested in UFOs and giants and unusual accounts in the Bible. And these are some of the examples that he collected. So I just want to, make a reference to Patrick there. But it just shows you that even in the Bible, we find these reports. This is a very strange story. According to a German newspaper, a researcher called Gregor Spory went to 100 kilometers north of Cairo, and a grave robber, a kind of tomb robber, had been, involved in some excavations going up over many years, and he had to pay $300 to get these photos. But these are photos of a mummified finger, which is so large that they estimated that would have been of a giant who was 16 feet tall. So even in Egypt, we find these extremely ancient, potentially giant mummified beings, which I wouldn't be surprised if there were more yet to be uncovered and revealed, as a lot obviously is hidden there, as it is in many other places. Again, even on Philae Island back in 1881, the Temple of Isis on the banks of the Nile, 16 miles below Najd Dafar, opened a row of tombs in which a prehistoric race of giants had been buried, the largest 11 feet 1 inch. So even in pharaonic times, or possibly earlier, we find evidence of giants in Egypt. We get them in Russia. This is a very large skull, 33 inches 33 inches long bones in the mountains of Russian Central Asia, north of the Himalayas. There's more reports as well. These are actually some photos that were taken in 1998 of some skeletons that were discovered in Georgia. It's estimated that the giant man was about 9 to 10 feet tall, and that the skull was around 3 times the size of a normal human skull. They look pretty powerful beings, don't they? And this was commented on by a brilliant researcher called Steve Quayle, who said that a 4-meter human skeleton was found by 2 amateur archaeologists in Georgia near the village of Udabno in the summer of the year 2000. And skeletons of giants were also found at a cave near Gora Kazbek, Georgia in the 1920s. So many reports turning up there as well. And even in Sardinia, there's huge amounts of legends of giants linked with all these megalithic sites on the island. There was a recent TV programme in England as well about this, which kind of surprised me. But this is one example here, one of the archaeological reports that got commented on in the newspaper. The 2 skeletons, both intact and surrounded by weapons, furnishings and vases, were more than 8 feet tall. However, there are records of much taller ones in that part of the world. This is a relatively recent report, I think from a couple of years ago. These remains could date back to thousands of years BC, and they found 10 feet tall men found in there, 10 feet tall skeletons. This is a recent report, just put out online in an online newspaper. This just shows you where they've been reported across England and Europe. This is from a colleague of ours who we work with called Cecilia Hall, who puts all the data into Google Earth and creates a whole map of where they've been discovered. We've got a few more to add to this. This is just the early stages of analysing where they are. But clearly most of them seem to be in England. And clearly some of them, you can see, if you compare this to a map of megalithic sites around Europe, you'll find that they match pretty closely. And just to tantalise you even more, this is actually from Steve Quayle again. And the bottom left there, you can see this is a kind of standard height human. This is kind of my height, I'm 6'1". Again, this is the one potentially that was in Turkey. Some other, there's even Maximus Thrax of Rome was 8'6". Goliath was supposed to be 10'6". King Og of Bashan was 12 foot. Other ones here from France, they seem to either are the biggest or claim to be the biggest. And this one here, these 3 are from France. And this is interesting because this is the whole area where some of the largest megaliths in the world that John Martineau was talking about last night do exist. This is probably the most extreme one I've ever heard of. But this was written up, reported, probably exaggerated, as I don't even know if you'd be able to walk if you're that tall. But if we go further afield, even in Osaka, Japan, where we have some incredible megalithic sites, including these dolmens and these huge polygonal walls around the Osaka Palace. We have, this is back in 1918. Interestingly, the teeth are evenly worn down. Decayed teeth are not found again, which is something that fascinates me. The bony structure of the skeletons are massive. Shin bones in most cases are somewhat flat. Some of these skeletons stand 7 feet high. Even shorter ones are over 6 feet. And this just shows you some of the megalithic construction found in that direct area. And just coming back local, we even had a chance, thanks to Nash and Michael, we had a chance to go up to the famous Goliath's footprint. I'm not sure of the exact location of it because we were all slightly delirious by the time we got there. But there's Michael posing beautifully with the footprint, whereas I'm just trying to compare my size to it, which looks like an absurd thing to do. The Ministry of Funny Walks or something even. But anyway, it fascinated me. I've been wanting to go to here for ages, and I persuaded and encouraged the group to come and have a look at it, which turned into quite a saga. But it's over 4 feet long. On investigation, it has 6 toes. Unfortunately and weirdly, it's in granite, so it doesn't make sense how it could have naturally been trodden on by a giant. But as Michael points out, here, you can see here, there's this sort of overlap of rock, of where you put your foot in, when you walk along any kind of, when you walk in molten lava, for instance, you put your foot in it, a bit at the front will come up, like you do when you walk in mud. So he pointed that out, and it was chosen because of that. It's just a very unusual, I mean, some people say it's 5 toes. It looks like 6 to me on investigation. It's 4 feet long, so the height of that person, unless they just had massive feet, would have been in excess of 20 feet tall, maybe 25, even 30 feet tall. It's incredible, really. It's said officially to be over 9 million years old, and the foot of a woman, which is interesting. And even in Johannesburg, a skeleton of a man who was 10 feet, or near Johannesburg, a skeleton of a man who was 10 feet tall was said to have been dug up in the area. It clearly shows the Goliath's footprint on the top left, but it gives you some other examples here, and some do have 6 toes. We're going to look in more detail at some of the more interesting ones, because some of these could just be, carved out, could be jokes, I don't know. But in New Zealand and Kiribati, we do find giant footprints, again, with 6 toes, suggesting this was a genetic trait of the ancient giant race. We even find a reference to it in the Bible as well. A huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all, was discovered. And if we start jumping over to the Americas, we'll find that in the early 1900s, several giants, or hundreds of them, mummified giants, were found in caves in an area called Sonora, which is about 100 miles from the US border. This is the guy who discovered them. With some of the artifacts. This all got pretty badly covered up, but they were 7 feet upwards. But then about a decade ago, in exactly the same area, these were discovered, these incredible skeletons with these incredibly long skulls, which is something I think Brian is going to be talking about today. And this just shows you that even in this part of Mexico, it seems that these were different races, these giants and these long skulls. And this certainly was an area they both coexisted in, or there's debate as to whether it was at different times. For some reason, they were both obviously attracted to that area. This again is in Mexico. A cave containing some 200 skeletons of men, each above 8 feet in height, were discovered. One of the skeletons, a total length to be 8 foot 11 inches, almost 9 feet tall. In a mound near San Juan, Mexico, there's been unearthed a skeleton of a giant man who evidently belonged to a prehistoric race. The length of the skeleton is 12 feet and 7 inches. This is just some examples from Mexico. And Peru, we find examples there as well. Captain Beasley and his party found relics of a giant prehistoric race. One of their finds is an incomplete skeleton, including the skull of a human being who must have been 8 feet tall. This is in the area of the Amazon. This is interesting as well. There were stories about a band of red-haired hunchback giants who fueled speculation that they were living in the northern jungles of Peru. The story of the olive-skinned, barefoot, hunchback men, more than 6 feet, twice the normal size. Their feet were twice the normal size. It's sparking debate amongst anthropologists and historians. These were an unknown race, and they were believed to be descended from the Chancas, the tribe that retreated into the northern jungles rather than submit to the Spanish conquistadors. There's lots and lots of stories along the Amazon of giant races, including the famous Amazon women, who were like a pretty powerful giant race, existed in the area. Some even, and they were fair-skinned, with blonde and red hair as well. And even at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, there's been obviously many elongated skulls found around this area, but there's legends of giants. The founder of the ancient Tiwanakan pre-Incan civilization, Viracocha, was said in legend to have created giants to move the massive stones that comprise much of their archaeology, but then grew unhappy with the giants and created a flood to destroy them, which is a very close echo of what we get with the Nephilim and the biblical tradition, where a flood was created to destroy the giants because they got out of hand. Okay, now we move on to North America. He just shows you some examples here, mainly from North America, of what we've been discovering over the years. This shows you where most of them come from, where the reports come from. We've actually got over 1,000 reports now from all over just North America, within the North American continent, not even going into Canada or Mexico, just in North America. You can clearly see where they congregate heavily is in Ohio and Pennsylvania. This is the whole Ohio Valley mound culture area, which is somewhere I've explored at length a couple of years ago, and I was exploring with Ross Hamilton and others. And even up in New England, where there's many megalithic sites, up in this area here, we find hundreds of megalithic structures, dolmens, chambers, standing stones, even stone circles. And here we have over 100,000 recorded earthworks and mounds have been recorded in North America, mainly along this area of the Mississippi, spreading east and west. But also we find mounds all down here, and even on Catalina Island over here, and even on the very east coast of New England, up in Maine, where you get these very, very ancient stone mounds going back to 7,000 or 8,000 years. So on either side of the country, there have been archaeological discoveries going back to 7,000 to 8,000 years old, which is much older than the official dating of the mound culture peoples. These are just some examples here. We've got so many. I just threw a random selection in, really, but just to give you, some examples of differences and correspondences here. This is from Kern County, California. Workmen in the new area in Jeffersonville exhumed 12 feet from the surface a part of the skeleton of a giant who was 12 feet high. Here we have in Oakland, California, we're starting on the west side, that the skeleton is that of a man at least 8 feet tall. Here, this is in Oregon, the skull, jawbone, thigh and other parts of the larger skull indicated a man of my mind at least 8 feet high. The bones were uncovered fully 20 feet below the surface, suggesting extreme antiquity. Again, in this area in the desert around Los Angeles, California, of relics of an ancient civilization whose men were 8 to 9 feet tall in the Colorado desert near the Arizona-Nevada-California border. These giants are clothed in garments consisting of a medium-length jacket and trouser extending slightly below the knees. Very cool. The texture of the material is said to resemble grey dried sheepskin, but obviously it was taken from an animal unknown today. Again, this just shows you the kind of technology that they were kind of working with. This is an example. This is actually from Catalina Island, where they've actually found hundreds of giant skeletons, and recently a researcher there, when they were cleaning the whole area of this guy called Gideon's museum, they found this whole box of lost reports, records and recollections and photos. And this is one of the ones that popped out of it. And it's been kind of very heavily suppressed, the whole Catalina Island discovery. Basically they believe there was a stone circle on Catalina Island off the coast of California. They found evidence of ritual, stoneworking, advanced technology. They were a fair-skinned, blonde and red-haired race that existed there at least, some people say 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. This is one example here. One of the skulls measured 26.5 inches around, and the body bones with it indicated that the men were fully 7 feet in height. There were much larger ones found there as well. This just gives you one example. Getting back to some footprints, these are the very controversial Paluxy footprints from Texas. The unusual thing about these ones is that they are right next to dinosaur footprints. These are very, very long. You can see the length of them, they're a couple of feet long. No pun intended. But the dinosaur footprints right next to it are sort of, I don't know why they're going in different directions, but they are. And these were found on a whole layer of bedrock that kind of got covered up over different epochs. Still in that general area, we go to Nevada, and the famous Lovelock Caves, mummies and skeletons that have been discovered. They were said to be a legendary tribe of red-haired cannibalistic giants. That is going to scare you if you meet a bunch of them, isn't it? But you can see the size of them. You can see the jaw size on the top right there compared to a normal jaw. And on the bottom right, this is one of their sandals that they even wore. That was managed to survive many thousands of years. The whole story goes that they were actually the Paiute oral history, who were the Native American tribe of that area, were terrorized by these red-haired cannibalistic giants, and even they would be eaten by them. If there wasn't enough food to go around, the giants would just turn up at the places these Native Americans were staying and just go and grab them and eat them. It's pretty scary. You know, that size jaw coming after you, it would be pretty scary. And so what they did is that the Paiute all got together, and when all the giants, they chased all the giants into Lovelock Caves. This is going back, you know, over 150, no, several hundred years, because as the legend states, they actually hid them in it and then made a massive fire at the entrance of the cave and killed them all, smoked them all out, and took out this whole race of giants who lived in the Nevada area. Some of them that didn't get burnt were actually mummified, actually very, very sophisticated mummified remains, and they all had red and blonde hair again and this pale skin, suggesting a much earlier prehistoric race of unknown origin existed in that area. This actually shows you a rare photo on the left there of one of the skulls that have now been removed from display. In most other museums you get that. This is partly to do with the NAGPRA Act, the Native American Graves Repatriation Act. I think that's the right order of words, I'm not sure. On the bottom right there you can see the powerful jaws that would have munched on humans. And here, in just not too far from there in Utah, more red-haired and wavy-haired, a white race in America, thousands of years old. These were, you know, years before the Indians or the Cliff Dwellers, it states. This one on the left here is actually from San Diego. It was actually discovered in San Diego. It's, I think, 10 feet high. Again, it had red hair and it was mummified. And on the right-hand side is very similar, the same size, same style of mummification, red hair, fair-skinned mummy from China, which is 3,000, I believe 3,600 around that area BC. So we're finding correspondences all over the world. This is just nicely placed bones here, to go for the skull and crossbones look. These were found actually in New Jersey, in Tuckerton. One of the skeletons measured over 7 feet and was that of a veritable giant. And he was actually killed by some blunt weapon. And on the right-hand side here, this is Pleasantville, New Jersey, I think, or Baltimore. They run his size from a small child to several of 7 feet in height, and one, supposed to be an old medicine man, must have been at least 8 feet in height. So this is over in New Jersey, on the eastern side of America. Even in Connecticut, there's extremely ancient bones and skeletons to be found that predate anything that should be there. And they were flattened heads, so they were altering the skull shape in North America. And this goes back potentially to 7,000 years. There's other reports in New England of that kind of era. It's very strange. Very great strength, a perfect set of teeth of unusual size, probably for eating humans. Again, this is in Syracuse. This is western New York, and there's a whole area here of mounds. This is the most western area of the traditional Ohio Valley mound culture peoples. Back in 1876, when they excavated one of these mounds, or probably looted, I'd probably imagine, they found skeletons 9 feet high, and other examples in that area. And these are the two, and then it was reconstructed by this guy here, who actually decided to, his grandfather measured the bones, so he reconstructed these models and has them on display in a museum you can actually still visit. Obviously the skeletons are being taken away. Again, this shows you in Massachusetts, the oldest human skeleton after New England, believed to be 7,000 years old, may have been from a man of European origins. And we are seeing these examples of these giant skeletons with the connections with Britain and Ireland. This is just from an area near Boston. One of the larger mounds was entered years ago, and 5 very large skeletons were removed. Not much detail about that one, but it was there. This is me posing at McKee's Mound. We spent 8 hours trying to find this mound where the skeleton was, this giant skeleton was buried, but all that was left was a pile of sand and a sign. So we were quite disappointed. But this whole area here, 33 skeletons were found with some beautiful artifacts. Several of the skeletons were giants. They don't mention that on the sign. This actually shows you some of the skeletons when they were discovered. McKee's Mound north of Pittsburgh, and reported in the newspaper. Now we get into Ohio. There's so many reports here, it's kind of ridiculous. Ross Hamilton's done the main research here. 8 feet tall giant there. Another one on the right, a man must have been at least 11 feet high. This is actually up in Michigan. And we have the famous Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia. This is the largest mound in the country, actually. It's almost as big as Silbury Hill in England. 70 feet tall, a diameter of 295 feet, 60,000 tons of earth and rock were used to make this. And there was the first excavation was there in 1838 that yielded 2 large skeletons, one female and one male. The female one was said to be of European origin. She shows you some pictures of it here and the map of the area showing some of the geodetic connections between lots of the stone towers, mounds and earthworks around that whole area. Fascinating place. It's also where they found the Grave Creek tablet, which is very unusual inscriptions which they suggest were Punic or European on this tablet. So it does give some credence to the European female skeleton being found there. This is again in West Virginia, the burial place of a noted chief who had been interred with unusual honours. At the bottom they found the bones of a human being measuring 7 feet in length and 19 inches across the shoulders. This is in the same area of West Virginia. Even at a place called Miamisburg, very large, beautiful conical mound there. There's a whole story associated with this, but I'll just summarise that they found 2 skeletons, one in the mound and another in this stone coffin, which is about 9 feet long. That was got discovered because a tree got blown over in a storm. Even at Serpent Mound, which is really the sort of omphale of Ohio, the whole Ohio Valley culture. This is the best example of a serpent mound. There are others. This is the one that survived being partly reconstructed, but it just shows you a very high level of sophistication. Each of the curves in it give very clear evidence of astronomical alignments. This is all on this high bluff here. Ross Hamilton has decoded this very brilliantly, and there's strange similarities to Glastonbury Tor. This is actually a photo, this is actually a postcard you could buy about 80 years ago of a giant skeleton that was discovered in one of the mounds surrounding the Serpent Mound. From there, which is his knee, it's been cut off at the knee, to his top of his head was 7 foot. So with the shin and a foot on it as well, it probably would have been over 8 feet tall. So even at famous sites like Serpent Mound, we do find these kinds of examples. This is Ross Hamilton on the bottom right here. And this is my friend John, who's wearing a fantastic t-shirt. This is actually a large monolith here, which is a very similar shape actually to the one that has fallen down the eastern slope of Adam's Calendar here in South Africa. This is the sort of top part of the ridge where Serpent Mound's on behind it. This is the stone here. And this, we believe, was actually in this part here, the middle of the egg, which is sort of being held in the mouth. Well, we believe it's an egg. And it would have acted as some kind of lightning conductor. And this is the only known megalith of that whole area in Ohio. Now we get onto the Smithsonian files. This is where it all gets a bit sinister, shall we say. Because the problem in America is when you're trying to research this particular subject is the lack of bones. Simple as that. Where are the bones? Everyone keeps asking us that. So me and Jim and Ross are actually on a mission to try and find some of these bones and skeletons and teeth, and we're hoping some are going to come forth. But in hundreds of the reports, literally hundreds of the reports, it ends by saying the bones have been taken away by the Smithsonian for further investigation. And they never get heard of again. A few years later, when the farmers with the land they discovered it on, they go back there to try and find them. No, we have no record of that. There's even receipts of them paying for skeletons, like $500 receipts and things like this. Disappeared, everything. They've all been disappeared, the whole lot. Here's just some examples here. This guy, Hedrickler, actually, is a real pain in the arse. But he's one of the people who really ran the Smithsonian. And he was one of the people who had this manifest destiny agenda to actually maintain the status quo with evolution, with manifest destiny, and seeing everyone in this, all the Indians or the Native Americans as savages, which is, basically racist. And this was a big issue that was going on, and it still goes on, I must admit. There's still issues with that there. So this is the first level of kind of cover-up conspiracy when the Smithsonian got involved. And they got so involved, it got to a point where they were, as soon as there was any reports, they employed about 200 people to go out to mound sites, to go out and find any reports and to get all the skeletons, to disappear them as quickly as possible. A couple of reports here. It just shows you, here actually mentions his name, which is quite unusual to find that, but his name is in the same headline as a giant human skull that was discovered, which really annoyed him, I think, at the time, because he wanted to kind of keep it quiet. Here's one here, bones of abnormal size. Two of the largest bones, and the only two perfect ones we found, were a thigh bone and a jawbone. Each stood 6 feet, and if we measured the thigh bone correctly, it was about 2 inches longer than ours. My friend, with a full face full of whiskers, could slip the jawbone off and on quite easily. Thighs and skulls sent Smithsonian. Never heard from again. Another example here. This is actually from a private local history. Some years ago when Ben Smith found some years ago when the Colonel Ben Smith mound was opened by Professor Norris of the Smithsonian, he found the skeleton of a giant which measures 7 feet 8 inches in length. Also a stone axe was discovered, which was huge. Again, we have the Smithsonian involved here. This is the time when they were starting really in full flow of going to all the different sites to make sure they recovered the bones and disappeared them. Because not only did it go against evolution, it went against their racist agenda. Some other examples here. A representative of the Smithsonian Institution has been here investigating the curious relics. And this one was 14 feet high. No wonder they were interested. Nashville, Tennessee, the almost perfectly formed skeleton of an Indian 7 feet tall was unearthed here today. Again, efforts will be made to have a representative of the Smithsonian make a complete investigation of the site, never to be heard from again. More examples here, 7 foot tall skeletons. Again, Smithsonian getting involved. Again here, this is quite an interesting one actually, a 10 foot skeleton discovered. But what's weird about this one, it's talking about technology. As corroborative proof, the members now was exhibiting the rusty and time-worn barrel of what appears to be an ancient gun, weighing between 25 and 30 pounds, resembling a flintlock rifle. This, they said, was picked up beside the skeleton. These bones will be taken out of the cave at the earliest possible date and carefully packed and forwarded to the Smithsonian Institution. Yay! God, okay, more examples here. Giants, Smithsonian, there you go. This is the last slide of the Smithsonian, but we've got like probably 130, maybe 150 reports that end with the Smithsonian. No, maybe, I think it might be 250 in fact. So it's just a few examples here. And these were mostly found in lakes, in mounds, but often they were actually found just when digging deep at the foundations of houses, not just mounds. The jaw and teeth are unusually large. The bones have been sent to the Smithsonian Institution for further investigation. Smithsonian Institution determined age of skeleton found in Ohio. La-di-da. Okay, so we're getting the picture here. And the problem is when you actually go to the Smithsonian and you ask them, can I see the 100 giant skeletons you've hidden? They go, no, don't know anything about them. You can show them every single report there is. No, nothing. You can't break through it. It's a really tough nut to break. So we're trying to work out different ways to get in there, which could involve fluorescent jackets. I'm pretending to be electricians or something like that, but don't mention that. I have to delete this off the DVD, no, I'm joking. But this is one of the traits that keeps being found with these skeletons, not only in North America, but primarily in North America. And there's been some work done on this already. But this is very strange. This is like a genetic trait of the giant people here. It's just some examples here. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but I just wanted to show you a few examples here. The teeth are all in their place, and all of them are double and of extraordinary size. And here we have the jaw bones, which easily break, are so large that they will go around the face of a man today. The other bones are much larger than those of the ordinary man. The femur is 20 inches long, indicating scientists that they're about 80 inches tall, which is, I believe, 6 foot 8 inches. Again, more examples of the double rows of teeth. A couple of other ones here. The remains of a gigantic race of extinct human beings have been discovered near Vassar, Minnesota. Each had double teeth in front as well as in the back part of the jaw. One thigh bone measured 20 inches in length and was proportionately larger. The teeth were still sound and double all around. Here we go. This was at least 8 feet in height. The remarkable feature of these remains that they have double teeth in front as well as in the back of the mouth and in both upper and lower jaws. That's very clearly explained, isn't it? And yet archaeologists and academics who are looking at this dismiss it as no, they don't know what they're talking about. They mismeasured and they miscounted the teeth. So this is an issue which we're kind of hitting our heads against a brick wall, but there's so many reports, it gets a bit, becomes rather convincing. And also very thick skulls. The skull is very large and thick, fully 1/4 of an inch. This is one other trait that is found in many of these giant skeletons, very thick skulls, as well as double rows of teeth. A set of almost round double teeth are remarkably well preserved. There you go, more reports. Again, this is just another town history, which we've got all the references going in the book Jim and I are writing, so all these will be referenced. I haven't got time for that now. This is just a discovery, I'm not sure exactly where. In the kettles were scores of skulls and bones, some of them of men of great height. One skull had 2 rows of teeth. So you just keep finding these all over the place. This is one of the traits. And so this is one of the aspects which has been covered up. But we actually, Jim Vieira, who I'm working with on this, he actually got in contact with a medical doctor about this, a specialist in bone and teeth, and actually had a chat with him, and she said she knew someone who had double rows of teeth and they had them removed when they were a child. So the genetic trait still exists in North America, even though the giants have been pretty much wiped out now. You've got to remember as well, the giants were there when the first Europeans went over there, well, of the modern age, a few hundred years ago. They were meeting these giants all over New England. Even Abraham Lincoln and other presidents saw some 7-foot to 8-foot chiefs who were still around. Unfortunately, most of them have kind of died off now. I'm not sure why. But the other aspect here I just want to mention before I sort of close in a few minutes is the fact that not only do we have the Smithsonian problem, we also have the problem in 1990 of the NAGPRA Act that came forth, which was basically so the Native Americans could reclaim anything that was on display of grave goods, bones, urns, ashes, anything like that, could be reinterred, reburied in a ceremonial way, in the way that they wanted it to be, which is totally fair enough. However, they were colluding with the government on this, and there was another quiet agenda going on that no one really sussed. And I think may have been part of the problem of why there's nothing left on display, because they were removing skulls that they knew were from red-haired, blonde-haired, fair-skinned giants that were 7,000 or 8,000 years old in different parts of the country, which they knew weren't really related to them. There's different races that existed all over North America at different epochs. There's no racism going on here. It's just, you just got to look at the facts, look at the reports. So unfortunately, all of the skulls, even the ones that clearly showed European origin, were removed as well. So there's nothing left to see. This was back in 1990, so you can see that is part of the problem as well. But I'm working with Jim and Ross, and we're even working, Ross is connected with some Native American people up in Ohio and in Michigan, and there are other connections we're working on to see if there are any still stored in people's basements and things like this, because that's the smoking gun. We need to see the evidence. I have seen a giant skeleton myself in a museum, it's in Mutta Museum in Pennsylvania. And you can go there and you can look at it for yourself. I don't have a picture of it here, unfortunately, but this is a 7'6" skeleton, said to have acromegaly, which is a trait which, you know, you get a natural enlargement. And but I read the passage in the museum report, which it was taken about 60 years ago or something, and it clearly said the only way this museum is allowed to display this is if you do not tell where it came from. And it came from West Virginia, it came from northern Kentucky, which is right on the edge of the Mound Culture area. So in Mutta Museum, Pennsylvania, could be the only one still on display because the origins of where it came from have never been recorded. So I find that quite interesting. So there's lots of different levels as you get into this that you have to sort of penetrate and actually work through. Another aspect here is very interesting is these thousands of beautifully carved pipes that they were smoking something in. I can't imagine what that was. But here's one I actually saw, this is part of Wayne May's collection, who's editor of Ancient American magazine. I highly recommend you take a look at his website and subscribe to his magazine. This is one of the pipes I found. This is clearly not the pipe of a normal sized human. I'm sorry. I didn't test it or anything, but just holding it in my hand, you could tell. And this is one of the discoveries he's made. You can see some of the other examples of the flints, strange tablets with all this strange writing on it, which are connected with these giants. But I really question, I mean, what were they smoking? Because some very strange skulls have come out, including these ones. This horn skull, which a lot of people say is a fake, has never been proven to be so. It was found in Pennsylvania in the early 1900s. It was of a 7-foot giant, discovered in a mound. On the right-hand side, we have the Wisconsin skull, which shows the elongation that we see all over Peru and other places, and some other examples at the bottom there from central part of North America. So we can see that there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And my real purpose, my real kind of mission with this is just to kind of uncover the truth of what was going on. There's no great, you know, we're not trying to prove anything or anything like that. We just want to find out the true origins of humans and where they came from. And this is one of the stories which has been forgotten and which has been suppressed, even up to the 1990s and to the present day. And so this is the book we're working on. This is Jim Vieira and myself, actually in his giant office, which he's got hundreds of reports scattered all over his walls in Ashfield, Massachusetts. So thanks very much for listening. I appreciate it.
Banda